The morning sun streamed through the tall windows of the Riverside Music Academy, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart down the hallway, the wheels squeaking softly as she made her way to the practice rooms. She had been doing the same routine for 3 years now, and she knew every corner of this place like the back of her hand. The academy was one of those fancy schools where rich kids came to learn piano and violin, the kind of place where parents paid thousands of dollars every month just so their children could play classical music. Rosa had seen it all during her time here. Kids who threw tantrums when they couldn't play a piece perfectly. Parents who yelled at teachers when their little angels didn't get the solo parts in concerts. And teachers who acted like they were doing the world a favor by sharing their musical knowledge. But Rosa loved working here anyway. Not because of the people, mind you. Most of them barely looked at her when she walked by. She was just the cleaning lady to them. Someone who emptied their trash and made their bathrooms sparkle. Someone who didn't really matter in their world of music and prestige. No, Rosa loved this place because of the sounds. From the moment she unlocked the building at 6 in the morning until she locked it up again at night, the academy was filled with music. Piano melodies drifted from one room while violin scales echoed from another. Sometimes a student would play something so beautiful that Rosa would stop what she was doing just to listen. She had always loved music, even as a little girl growing up in a small town outside Mexico City. Her grandmother used to hum old songs while she cooked, and Rosa would dance around the kitchen pretending she was a famous singer. But music lessons cost money, and her family barely had enough to put food on the table. When she moved to America 15 years ago, she had bigger worries than chasing childhood dreams. She needed to work, to survive, to build a life. The cleaning job at the academy came along 3 years ago when she desperately needed work. Her previous job at the hotel had ended when new management took over. She had 2 kids to feed and rent to pay. When she saw the ad in the Spanish newspaper, she didn't care what kind of place it was. Work was work. But from her very first day, something magical happened. As she mopped the floors and wiped down the piano benches, she started to really listen to what the students were playing. At first it was just background noise, but slowly she began to recognize patterns. She noticed when someone played a wrong note. She could tell when a student was struggling with a difficult passage. The students came and went throughout the day. There was little Amy Chen, only 8 years old, but already playing pieces that sounded impossible. She practiced every Tuesday and Thursday at 2 o'clock, and Rosa always made sure to clean the hallway nearby during that time. Amy had small fingers, but somehow managed to make the piano sound like it was singing. Then there was teenage Kevin Rodriguez, who played with so much passion that Rosa worried he might break the piano keys. He always looked angry when he played, like he was fighting with the music instead of making friends with it. But the sounds that came from his practice room were incredible, full of fire and emotion that made Rosa's heart race. And Mrs. Patterson, the elderly woman who came for lessons every Wednesday morning. She played slowly and carefully, like she was afraid of making mistakes. Rosa admired her courage. Here was a woman in her 70s, learning something completely new. It made Rosa think about her own dreams that she had put away long ago. Professor Williams was different from the other teachers. He was the head of the piano department, and everyone treated him like he was some kind of musical god. Students were nervous around him. Parents tried to impress him with expensive gifts, but Rosa noticed something others didn't. When Professor Williams thought no one was watching, his shoulders would sag a little. He would sit at the piano and play pieces that sounded sad and lonely. Sometimes when Rosa was cleaning late at night after everyone had gone home, she would hear him still playing in his studio. The music that came from that room during those quiet hours was different, more personal, more real. It made Rosa understand that even famous teachers had feelings and struggles just like everyone else. The academy had 12 practice rooms, 2 large studios, and 1 beautiful concert hall with a stage that could fit a full orchestra. Rosa knew every inch of these spaces. She knew which piano bench wobbled slightly. She knew that the 3rd practice room had a window that stuck when you tried to open it. She knew that the concert hall had amazing acoustics that made even beginner students sound better than they really were. During her lunch breaks, Rosa would sometimes sit in the back of the concert hall with her sandwich and just listen to the sounds bouncing off the walls. The room was so quiet when it was empty, but it seemed to hold memories of all the music that had been played there. She would close her eyes and imagine what it would feel like to sit at that grand piano on the stage. But those were just daydreams. Rosa knew her place in this world. She was 42 years old with calloused hands and an aching back from years of cleaning jobs. She spoke English well enough to do her work, but she still had an accent that made some people treat her like she wasn't very smart. She wore a simple uniform and comfortable shoes, not the elegant clothes of the teachers and parents who filled these halls. Still, she couldn't help but feel connected to this place. Every day, she witnessed the power of music to change people's moods. She saw frustrated students finally master a difficult piece and watched their faces light up with joy. She observed shy children gain confidence as they learned to express themselves through the piano keys. Rosa had started to notice patterns in the music itself. She could tell when someone was playing a happy piece or a sad one, just by the rhythm and the way the notes flowed together. She began to recognize famous composers. Bach sounded different from Mozart, who sounded different from Chopin. Each had their own personality, their own way of speaking through music. As she pushed her cart toward the main studio that Tuesday afternoon, Rosa heard Professor Williams talking to someone on the phone. His voice sounded stressed, almost panicked. Something about his accompanist being sick and an important recital the next day. Rosa had heard enough conversations like this to know that accompanists were the people who played piano while other musicians performed. Without them, concerts had to be canceled. She knocked gently on the door frame and waited for permission to enter. Professor Williams looked up from his phone, his gray hair messy from running his fingers through it. His usually neat appearance was disheveled, and there were papers scattered across his desk. The stage was set for something unexpected to happen. Neither Rosa nor Professor Williams knew that this ordinary Tuesday afternoon was about to change both of their lives forever. Sometimes the most important moments start with the simplest circumstances. Sometimes magic happens when people least expect it. And sometimes, the person who has been invisible for years is about to step into the light in ways no one could have imagined. Professor Williams hung up the phone and let out a long, frustrated sigh. Rosa could see the worry lines on his forehead as he stared at the music sheet spread across his piano. She had never seen him look so defeated before. Usually he walked around the academy with confidence, his head held high like he owned the world. But right now he looked like a man who had run out of options. "Excuse me, Professor," Rosa said softly, not wanting to disturb him too much. "Should I come back later to clean your studio?" He looked up at her with tired eyes. "Oh, Rosa, no, it's fine, come in. I'm just having a terrible day." He rubbed his temples like he had a headache. "My piano accompanist just called in sick, and I have a very important recital tomorrow night. 3 years of planning and now everything might fall apart." Rosa had heard about this recital. It was a big deal at the academy. Some famous music critics were coming from the city to hear Professor Williams perform. There were posters all over the building advertising the event. Students had been talking about it for weeks, excited to see their teacher on stage. She began dusting the windowsill, trying not to make too much noise while he dealt with his crisis. But she couldn't help listening as he made phone call after phone call, trying to find someone who could step in at the last minute. Each conversation ended the same way. Either the person wasn't available, or they didn't know the pieces well enough to perform them tomorrow. "This is impossible," Professor Williams muttered after his 5th failed phone call. "The Chopin ballad alone takes months to master properly. How am I supposed to find someone who can play it perfectly with just 1 day's notice?" Rosa's heart jumped when she heard him mention the Chopin ballade. She knew that piece. She had heard Amy Chen practicing it for months until she finally got it right. She had listened to Kevin Rodriguez play it with all that fiery passion of his. She had heard Professor Williams himself play it during those lonely late-night sessions when he thought no one was around. But more than that, Rosa had something she had never told anyone. During those quiet evening hours when the academy was empty, she had taught herself to play that exact piece. It had started innocently enough. One night, about a year ago, she had been cleaning the concert hall when she heard the most beautiful melody drifting from one of the practice rooms. Someone had left a recording playing, and the music was so gorgeous that Rosa had to stop and listen. The next day, she asked little Amy what that beautiful song was called. Amy had smiled and told her it was Chopin's Ballade No. 1. From that moment, Rosa became obsessed with that piece. She would hum it while she worked. She would listen to different versions of it on her phone during lunch breaks, And late at night, when everyone was gone, she would sit at the piano in the concert hall and try to figure out how to play it. It took her months of secret practice. She didn't know how to read music, so she had to learn it all by ear. She would listen to recordings over and over, then try to find the right keys on the piano. Sometimes she would spend an entire hour just trying to get one small section right. Her fingers weren't trained like the students' fingers were, but she had something else. She had pure love for the music. Rosa continued dusting while Professor Williams made more desperate phone calls. She watched him grow more and more frustrated with each rejection. The recital was supposed to be the highlight of his year. Important people from the music world were coming specifically to hear him play. If he had to cancel now, it would be embarrassing and could hurt his reputation. Maybe I should just cancel the whole thing, he said to himself, staring at the ceiling like he was asking the universe for help. That's when something unexpected happened. Without really thinking about what she was doing, Rosa stopped dusting and turned to face him. "Professor Williams," she said quietly, "what if someone here could play the accompaniment for you?" He looked at her with a puzzled expression. "What do you mean?" "All my advanced students will be in the audience tomorrow night. I can't ask one of them to perform. They're not ready for something this important." Rosa's heart was beating so fast she thought he might hear it. She had never spoken up like this before. For 3 years, she had been the quiet cleaning lady who stayed in the background, but seeing him so upset made her want to help, even though she knew it was crazy. "I wasn't thinking about the students," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Professor Williams raised an eyebrow. "Then who?" "I've already called every professional pianist I know in the city." Rosa took a deep breath. This was either going to be the bravest thing she had ever done or the most embarrassing. "What if I told you that someone in this building right now knows how to play the Chopin Ballade?" "Rosa, I appreciate you trying to help, but I need someone with serious training. This isn't a casual performance. These pieces require years of study, and I know how to play it," Rosa interrupted, the words coming out before she could stop them. The room went completely silent. Professor Williams stared at her like she had just told him she could fly. Rosa immediately regretted opening her mouth. What was she thinking? She was a cleaning lady, not a concert pianist. She had learned the piece by sneaking around after hours, not through proper lessons and years of training. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, grabbing her cleaning supplies. "I shouldn't have said anything. That was stupid of me." But Professor Williams held up his hand to stop her from leaving. His expression had changed from confusion to curiosity. "Wait a minute, Rosa. Are you telling me you actually know how to play Chopin's Ballade No. 1? She nodded, feeling her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "I taught myself. I know it sounds crazy, but I've been listening to music here for 3 years, and I started learning some pieces on my own time." "You taught yourself," he repeated slowly, like he was trying to understand a foreign language. "I practice sometimes when everyone goes home," Rosa admitted. "I know I'm not supposed to touch the pianos, but I'm always very careful. I clean them afterward so no one knows." Professor Williams leaned back in his chair, studying her face carefully. Rosa could see him trying to decide if she was being serious or if this was some kind of joke. She understood his confusion. Why would a cleaning lady know how to play classical piano? It didn't make sense in his world where music was studied in expensive schools and taught by professors with fancy degrees. "Rosa," he said finally, "I'm not trying to be unkind, but playing Chopin is incredibly difficult. Even my advanced students struggle with his pieces. It's not something someone can just pick up by listening." "I understand," Rosa said. "I know it sounds impossible." There was a long pause. Professor Williams drummed his fingers on his desk, clearly thinking hard about something. Rosa wished she could take back everything she had just said. She had probably ruined her job by admitting she had been using the pianos without permission. Then, almost like he was talking to himself more than to her, Professor Williams said, "Well, I suppose at this point I don't have anything to lose." He looked up at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Rosa, would you show me what you can do?" Rosa's hand started shaking as she looked at the grand piano in Professor Williams' studio. This wasn't like those quiet nights when she played alone in the empty concert hall. This time someone was actually going to listen to her. Someone who knew what real piano playing sounded like. "I don't know if this is a good idea," she said, taking a step back toward the door. "Maybe you should keep calling other people." Professor Williams stood up from his chair and walked over to the piano bench. He pulled it out slightly and gestured for her to sit down. "Rosa, I've been teaching piano for 25 years. I can tell within the first few notes if someone knows what they're doing. If you really can play this piece, then you might just save my recital. And if you can't, well, I'm not any worse off than I am right now." Rosa looked at the piano keys. They seemed to glow under the studio lights like they were inviting her to touch them. She had dreamed so many times about playing for someone, about sharing the music she had learned in secret. But now that the moment was here, she felt terrified. "What if I mess up?" she asked. "Then you mess up," Professor Williams said gently. "Rosa, yesterday I thought you were just someone who cleaned my studio. Today you're telling me you might be able to save my career. I think we're both about to learn something new." Rosa wiped her sweaty palms on her uniform and slowly walked to the piano. She had played this same model before, but only in the dark when she was alone. Now, with Professor Williams watching her every move, the piano seemed bigger and more intimidating than usual. She sat down on the bench and adjusted the height slightly. Her cleaning supplies were still sitting on the nearby table, reminding her of who she was supposed to be in this place. Just the cleaning lady. Just someone who wasn't supposed to have dreams about music. "Take your time," Professor Williams said, but Rosa could hear the doubt in his voice. She knew he was probably thinking this was all a big mistake. He was probably already planning to call more people after she failed to play anything decent. Rosa placed her fingers on the keys and took a deep breath. She closed her eyes and tried to remember those peaceful nights when it was just her and the music. She thought about little Amy practicing this same piece over and over until she got it right. She thought about the way Chopin's music could make her feel like she was flying. Then she started to play. The first notes of the ballade came out softly, almost whisper quiet. Rosa's fingers found their way across the keys like they remembered exactly where to go. She had played this opening so many times in the dark that her hands knew the music by heart. Behind her, she heard Professor Williams draw in a sharp breath. But Rosa didn't stop to look at him. She was lost in the music now, the way she always got when she played alone. The melody grew stronger and more confident as she moved into the first main theme of the piece. This was the part that had taken her months to learn. Chopin wrote music that seemed simple on the surface but was actually incredibly complex underneath. Every note had to be perfect, not just technically but emotionally too. Rosa had listened to dozens of recordings of famous pianists playing this piece, and each one brought out different feelings in the music. As she played, Rosa forgot about Professor Williams watching her. She forgot about being embarrassed or scared. She forgot about her cleaning uniform and her job, and all the reasons why she shouldn't be sitting at this piano. All that mattered was the music flowing through her fingers. The ballade moved into its more dramatic middle section, where the melody became passionate and urgent. This was Rosa's favorite part because it reminded her of her own life, all the struggles and dreams and hopes that she had kept hidden for so long. When she played these measures, she wasn't thinking about Chopin or proper technique. She was playing her own story. Her fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence. She could feel the music building toward the climax of the piece, that incredible moment where everything comes together in a burst of emotion. Rosa had always imagined that this part of the ballade sounded like someone finally breaking free from everything that had been holding them back. But then something happened that had never happened during her secret practice sessions. As she approached the most difficult passage in the entire piece, she could feel Professor Williams standing right behind her. She could sense his amazement, his complete shock at what he was hearing. And suddenly, Rosa was not just playing for herself anymore. She was playing for someone who understood music the way she did. That realization gave her a surge of confidence she had never felt before. Her playing became even more expressive, more alive. She took risks with the tempo that she had never dared to try. She added small touches of her own interpretation that made the music uniquely hers. The final section of the ballade approached like a storm building on the horizon. Rosa's hands flew across the keys, playing the fast, cascading notes that had taken her countless hours to master. She could feel sweat on her forehead, but she didn't care. This was the most alive she had ever felt. When she reached the final, dramatic chords of the piece, Rosa played them with all the emotion she had been holding inside for 3 years. The music filled the studio, bounced off the walls, and seemed to hang in the air long after the last note faded away. Rosa kept her hands on the keys for a moment, not wanting to break the spell. Then slowly she turned around to look at Professor Williams. He was standing completely still, his mouth slightly open, staring at her like he had just witnessed a miracle. His face had gone pale, and Rosa noticed that his hands were actually trembling. For what felt like forever, neither of them said anything. Rosa could hear her own heartbeat and the distant sound of a student practicing scales in another room. She started to worry that maybe she had played it all wrong, that Professor Williams was shocked by how terrible she was, not how good. Finally, he spoke, but his voice came out as barely a whisper. "Rosa, where did you learn to play like that?" She looked down at her hands, which were still resting on the piano keys. "I told you. I taught myself. I listened and I practiced when no one was here." "But that's impossible," Professor Williams said, walking around to face her directly. "The way you played that piece? The interpretation, the emotion, the technical skill. I have students who have been taking lessons for 10 years who can't play Chopin like that." Rosa didn't know what to say. She had always assumed that her playing was probably pretty bad compared to real pianists. She knew she made mistakes sometimes, and her technique wasn't perfect like the students who had proper training. "Was it okay?" she asked quietly. Professor Williams let out a laugh that sounded like he couldn't believe what had just happened. "Okay, Rosa, that was extraordinary. That was better than okay. That was—" He paused, searching for the right words. "That was some of the most beautiful piano playing I've heard in years." Rosa felt tears starting to form in her eyes, but she tried to blink them away. She had dreamed of hearing words like that for so long that she almost couldn't believe they were real. Professor Williams walked over to his desk and sat down heavily in his chair, like his legs couldn't support him anymore. He kept staring at Rosa with this look of complete amazement mixed with confusion. Rosa could almost see the questions spinning around in his head. "Rosa," he said finally, "I need you to help me understand something. You just played one of the most difficult pieces in classical piano like you've been studying it for years. But you're telling me you learned it by yourself with no teacher, no formal training?" Rosa nodded, suddenly feeling embarrassed again. Now that the music had stopped, she was back to being just the cleaning lady in her simple uniform. "I know it sounds crazy. It doesn't sound crazy. It sounds impossible." Professor Williams rubbed his forehead like he was getting a headache from trying to figure this out. "Rosa, please. Sit down and tell me your story, all of it. Because what I just heard doesn't make sense with what I know about learning piano." Rosa looked around the studio. She had cleaned this room hundreds of times, but she had never sat in one of the chairs meant for students and parents. It felt strange to be on this side of the conversation. "I don't know where to start," she said, settling into the leather chair across from his desk. "Start from the beginning. When did you first want to play piano?" Rosa smiled a little, remembering. "I was maybe 7 years old, living with my grandmother in a small town outside Mexico City. There was this old church near our house, and sometimes I would sneak in to listen when the organist practiced. The music was so beautiful it made me cry." She paused, getting lost in the memory. "My grandmother worked as a maid for a wealthy family, and sometimes she would take me with her to work. They had this beautiful piano in their living room, this shiny black thing that looked like it cost more than our house. I would stare at it and wonder what it would feel like to make music come out of it." Professor Williams was listening intently, like he was trying to solve a puzzle. "Did you ever get to touch it?" "Once," Rosa said, and her eyes lit up. "The family went away for a weekend, and my grandmother was supposed to check on the house. I was maybe 9 years old. While she was cleaning upstairs, I snuck into the living room and pressed one key. Just one. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard." "What happened then?" Rosa's expression grew sad. "My grandmother caught me. She was so scared that we would get in trouble. She made me promise never to touch anything that didn't belong to us. She said people like us weren't meant for things like pianos and music lessons. We were meant to work hard and be grateful for what we had." Professor Williams frowned. That must have been heartbreaking for a child. It was. But I never stopped loving music. In high school, there was one old computer in the library that could play videos from the internet. During lunch breaks, I would watch piano performances and try to understand how the players moved their fingers. I would go home and practice the fingerings on our kitchen table, pretending it was a piano. Rosa's voice got quieter as she continued her story. "When I was 18, I married my boyfriend, Miguel. He was a good man, but he thought music was a waste of time. He said I needed to focus on real life, not silly dreams. So I put away my fantasies about playing piano and concentrated on being a wife. Did you ever regret that decision?" "Every day," Rosa said honestly. "But then we moved to America when I was 27. Miguel had a cousin here who said he could help us find work. Everything was so hard at first. New language, new culture, no money. We had our first child, then our second. I worked in hotels, restaurants, anywhere that would hire someone with limited English. Professor Williams was hanging on every word. When did music come back into your life? 3 years ago when I got this job. The first day I walked into this building, I heard a student playing Mozart, and I started crying right there in the hallway. I had forgotten how much I missed music, all those years of pushing down my dreams, and suddenly I was surrounded by it again. Rosa stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the courtyard where students sometimes ate lunch. At first I just listened while I worked, but slowly, I started to really pay attention to what they were playing. I began to recognize different composers, different styles. I could tell when someone was playing well and when they were struggling. And then you started teaching yourself? It happened by accident. One night I was cleaning the concert hall really late. Everyone had gone home hours earlier, but I had to finish mopping the floors before the next day. I saw the big piano up on the stage and I remembered that feeling from when I was 9 years old, touching that one key in the rich family's house. Rosa turned back to face Professor Williams. I walked up to the piano and pressed one key just like I did as a child. But this time no one stopped me, so I pressed another one and another. I spent an hour that night just listening to individual notes, remembering how much I loved the sound. How did you learn actual pieces? Slowly, very slowly. I would listen to the students during the day, then try to remember what they played when I was alone at night. The first song I learned was Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star because I heard one of the youngest students practicing it over and over. Professor Williams smiled. Everyone starts with Twinkle, Twinkle. It took me 2 weeks to get it right. Rosa laughed. My fingers didn't know how to move independently, but once I could play that simple song, I felt like I could do anything. I started listening more carefully to the more advanced students. I would take notes on my phone about which pieces they were working on, then look up recordings online. What about the Chopin Ballade? Rosa's face grew serious. That piece chose me, not the other way around. I first heard little Amy Chen practicing it about a year ago. Something about that melody just reached into my heart and wouldn't let go. I must have listened to 50 different recordings of it online. I studied videos of pianists' hands. I practiced tiny sections over and over until my fingers remembered them. How long did it take you to learn the whole piece? 8 months. There were some passages that I thought I would never get right. My hands aren't trained like a real pianist's hands. I don't have the proper technique. But I had something else. Rosa's voice grew stronger. I had pure love for that music. When I played those difficult sections, I wasn't thinking about finger positions or timing. I was thinking about how the music made me feel. Professor Williams was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked the question Rosa had been dreading. Rosa, why didn't you ever take real lessons? Why didn't you tell anyone you could play? Rosa looked down at her hands. Because people like me don't become pianists. I'm a cleaning lady from Mexico who never finished high school. I have an accent and calloused hands and 2 kids to feed. Who would take me seriously as a musician? But you have incredible natural talent. With proper training you could— Professor Williams, Rosa interrupted gently. I appreciate what you're saying, but I live in the real world. I can't afford music lessons. I can't quit my job to chase dreams. I have responsibilities. The room fell silent. Professor Williams looked like he wanted to argue with her, but he seemed to understand the weight of her practical concerns. Finally, he spoke again. Rosa, would you be willing to play the accompaniment for my recital tomorrow night? Rosa stared at Professor Williams like he had just asked her to fly to the moon. You want me to perform in your recital? In front of all those important people? Rosa, I need someone who can play that Chopin piece beautifully, and you just proved you can do exactly that. Those music critics coming tomorrow night will hear something special, something real. That's what great music is supposed to be. Rosa's mind was racing. She thought about all the posters around the academy advertising this recital. She thought about the fancy people who would be in the audience, the ones who paid hundreds of dollars for concert tickets and wore expensive clothes to cultural events. I can't do that, she said, shaking her head. What would people think when they see the cleaning lady sitting at the piano? They'll think it's some kind of joke. Professor Williams stood up and walked around his desk to face her. Rosa, let me tell you something about music. The audience doesn't care who you are or what job you have. They only care about one thing. Does the music touch their hearts? and your playing tonight touched mine more than anything I've heard in years." That evening, Rosa went home to her small apartment where her 2 teenagers were doing homework at the kitchen table. She made dinner like she always did, helped them with their math problems, and got them ready for bed. But inside, her heart was pounding with excitement and terror. She hadn't given Professor Williams an answer yet. He had told her to think about it overnight and call him in the morning. But Rosa couldn't think about anything else. She kept imagining herself on that big stage playing for hundreds of people. The idea was both thrilling and absolutely terrifying. "Mom, you seem weird tonight," her daughter Isabella said while Rosa was washing dishes. "Is everything okay at work?" Rosa almost laughed. How could she explain that her boss had asked her to perform in a concert, that after 3 years of being invisible, someone had finally heard her secret music? "Just a long day, mija," she said, drying her hands on a kitchen towel. But that night Rosa couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her grandmother's words from so many years ago. People like us aren't meant for pianos and music lessons. Was that really true? Or had she been limiting herself all these years because she was afraid to dream too big? The next morning, Rosa called Professor Williams before she lost her courage. "I'll do it," she said quickly before she could change her mind. "I'll play in your recital." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then Professor Williams let out a whoop of joy that was so loud Rosa had to hold the phone away from her ear. "Rosa, you just saved my career. We need to meet this afternoon to practice together. This is going to be incredible." The rest of the day passed in a blur. Rosa cleaned the academy like she always did, but everyone could tell something was different about her. She was humming under her breath, and there was a spring in her step that hadn't been there before. At 2 o'clock, she met Professor Williams in the concert hall. They spent 3 hours practicing together, working on the timing and making sure their musical interpretations matched. Rosa had never played with another musician before, and it was like discovering a whole new language. "You're a natural accompanist," Professor Williams told her during a break. "You listen to what I'm doing and respond to it. That's a gift that can't be taught." As evening approached, Rosa went home to get ready. She didn't own any fancy clothes, but she had one simple black dress that she wore to church on special occasions. She brushed her hair carefully and put on the small pearl earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. When she looked in the mirror, she saw something different. She still looked like Rosa the cleaning lady, but there was something new in her eyes. A confidence that hadn't been there that morning. Her children were amazed when she told them where she was going. "Mom, you're going to be on stage?" her son Carlos asked. "Like a real stage with lights and everything?" "Yes, mijo. And I'm scared to death." "You'll be great, Mom," Isabella said, giving her a hug. "You've always loved music. Now everyone gets to hear why." Rosa arrived at the academy an hour before the concert. The parking lot was full of expensive cars, and people in elegant clothing were walking toward the main entrance. Rosa had to remind herself that she belonged here tonight, that she wasn't just the cleaning lady anymore. Backstage, Professor Williams was pacing nervously. When he saw Rosa, his face lit up with relief. "There you are. Are you ready for this?" "No," Rosa said honestly. "But I'm here." They could hear the audience gathering in the concert hall. The buzz of conversation, the rustle of programs, the occasional laugh. Rosa peeked through the curtain and saw hundreds of people filling the seats. Some she recognized from the academy, but most were strangers. Important-looking strangers who probably knew a lot about classical music. "What if I mess up?" Rosa whispered. "Then we mess up together," Professor Williams said. "But Rosa, I've been performing for 25 years and I can tell you something about audiences. They want you to succeed. They're not here hoping you'll fail. They're here because they love music just like you do." When it was time to go on stage, Rosa's legs felt like rubber. The stage lights were so bright she couldn't see the audience clearly, which was probably a good thing. The grand piano sat in the center of the stage like a beautiful black mountain. Professor Williams introduced the evening and mentioned that his usual accompanist was ill, but that he was honored to be performing with a remarkable musician who has reminded me why we fall in love with music in the first place. Rosa walked to the piano bench and sat down. Her hands were shaking slightly, but when she placed them on the keys, something magical happened. The nervousness faded away and she was back in her element. This was just her and the music, the same as it had been during all those quiet nights. The first piece went perfectly. Then the second. With each song, Rosa grew more confident. She could feel the audience responding to the music, leaning forward in their seats during the quiet passages, sighing with appreciation during the beautiful moments. But the real test came when they reached the Chopin Ballade. This was the piece Rosa had learned in secret, the one that had captured her heart completely. As she played the opening notes, she forgot about the audience, about her fears, about everything except the story the music was telling. She played with all the emotion she had learned to pour into those keys during her lonely practice sessions. But now, instead of playing for empty chairs, she was sharing her music with people who understood its beauty. When the final notes of the ballade faded away, there was complete silence in the concert hall. Rosa's heart sank. Had she played it wrong? Had she embarrassed herself and Professor Williams? Then the applause started. Not polite concert clapping, but thunderous, enthusiastic applause that seemed to go on forever. People were standing up. Some were wiping tears from their eyes. Rosa could see faces in the front row, and they were smiling at her with genuine appreciation. After the concert, people crowded around Rosa backstage. Music critics who had come to review Professor Williams' performance wanted to know about her background, her training, her story. She found herself telling her tale over and over, watching faces change from skepticism to amazement. One elderly woman, a music teacher from the city, took Rosa's hands in hers. "My dear, you have a gift that comes along maybe once in a generation. Please don't let it go to waste." 6 months later, Rosa was still cleaning at the academy, but now she also took piano lessons with Professor Williams twice a week. The academy had created a special scholarship fund for her, and she was working toward performing her first solo recital. More importantly, Rosa had learned that dreams don't have expiration dates. At 42 years old, she had discovered that it's never too late to let your heart sing its true song. And sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the most unexpected places.